I want to tell you about a war. Not a war you're going to read about in tomorrow's headlines. Not a war being fought on some distant battlefield with weapons you can see. This is a different kind of war. Quieter, more patient, more dangerous in some ways than any shooting war America has ever faced. Because wars you can see, you can prepare for. Wars you cannot see have a way of being over before you ever realized they had even started. This is a war, a battle for the soul of America. Over her identity, over her history, over the foundation she was built on, and whether that foundation is going to survive the generation we are living in right now. And by almost every honest measure, we are losing it. Welcome to What's Important Now. I'm Tom Sears, and today we are launching a brand new series that I've been building toward for a long, long time. It's called The Battle is On. And if you've been listening to this program for any length of time, you know that everything I have been talking about for over 23 years has been pointing to this conversation. This series is drawn directly from my new book, The Battle is On, America's New Civil War. And we are going to spend many episodes going chapter by chapter through that book, unpacking that argument, telling those stories, and most importantly, giving you the clarity and the conviction and, well, the direction to do something about what you're hearing. You can find the book and everything else Legacy Living Media has to offer at legacylivingmedia.com. We will come back to that at the end of the program. But right now, let's get to it. Episode 1, The Shot Not Heard.
Welcome to the What's Important Now broadcast. In America today, we are witnessing a cultural shift. This is the show devoted to the battle for the soul of our country. Join our host, Tom Sears, as he explains the issues of our day and join the fight to bring values and morality back. Let's join Tom now as he shares what's important now.
April 19th, 1775, there's a small bridge over a small river in a small Massachusetts town called Concord. There were a group of colonial militiamen that faced a column of British soldiers, and somebody fired, and the world changed forever. Ralph Waldo Emerson called it the shot heard round the world, and he was right. That single exchange of a musket fire told everyone something fundamentally had shifted. The argument was over. What came next would be decided not in Parliament, but on battlefields, because everybody knew that a war had started. You could hear it. The war America is in today started nothing like that. There was no shot. There was no declaration. There was no single morning when Americans woke up and understood that the country had entered into a fight that would determine whether it survived, at least in any recognizable form. There, in fact, was just a slow, quiet, patient work of change. A textbook revised here, a court decision there, a university faculty gradually filled up with people who no longer believed that the university was founded to teach. We've seen a generation of journalists trained in schools that had long since walked away from any fixed standard of truth. No shot, no declaration, no moment that you can point to and say, well, right there, that's how it started. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Because a war you cannot see is a war you cannot prepare for. And a war you cannot prepare for is a war, well, you're already losing. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not trying to give you gloom and doom. I've been doing What's Important Now for, well, at least 23 years. And I'm not trying to produce fear because I believe, fear, it's not real useful, but clarity is. And so what I want to give to you in this series that we're starting is the clearest possible picture of what is actually happening in this country. But not only what is happening, why it's happening, and then what we can do about it. But I cannot give you clarity without first making sure you understand the scope of what we are dealing with. So let me start first with a definition. What do I mean when I say culture war? Because, well, it's a phrase that gets thrown around constantly in political commentary and media outlets all across America. And it almost always gets used wrong. So when you think about most journalists in America today, they talk about a lot of hot button social issues. And then, maybe that term is used to fire up politicians who then turn to fire up their base. Or it's used as a put down. Culture war is a put down. A way of saying that, well, these people are not arguing about anything serious. They're just performing for their tribe. This is not what I mean. It's not even close. A culture war, I believe, in the most serious sense, is a conflict over the very foundation of a society. Not a disagreement about policy, not a debate about the best way to reach a shared goal, a conflict over the goals themselves, over what a human being is, over where rights come from, over what a family is for, what a school is for, what a government is for, what a life is for. And ladies and gentlemen, these are not small questions. They are questions that everything else depends on. If you get them right, and almost everything downstream has a chance of going right too. If you get them wrong, there's no amount of money, military strength, or even good intentions that's going to save it. I've talked a great deal in 23 years about Rome. I'm not talking about the Rome that's portrayed in movies. I'm talking about the real Rome, the Rome that built roads and laws and had an empire that lasted for centuries. Rome did not fall because it ran out of soldiers. Actually, it had more soldiers in the end than it had in the beginning. Rome fell because the convictions that built it were gone. A shared sense of purpose. The willingness to sacrifice something for the greater good. Something bigger than yourself. And the moral foundation was abandoned that ultimately made the whole thing work. A gentleman by the name of Edward Gibbon, he spent 6 volumes analyzing why Rome fell. I've talked about this in previous episodes. His core answer was very simple. He said that Rome fell from the inside before it ever fell from the outside. The enemies at the gate, they just finished what had already started internally, that internal collapse. And so I think about Rome when I think about America. I can't help it. I had a high school history teacher who talked about the cycle of civilizations and compared Rome to America. And so it's just been impressed upon me, and I've studied it. And I can't think of America without thinking of Rome, and I can't think of Rome without thinking about America. And it's not because I think America's fall is inevitable, because I don't. The difference is that America was founded on the promise of a living God who keeps his word. Rome had no such promise. But the pattern is the same. Nations that abandon their foundations, they do not survive indefinitely. Now, the question of whether America will be the exception to that pattern is the most important question of our time. And it has yet to be answered. Now, let me get specific here, because vague alarm, it does not help anybody. What you need is a clear picture of exactly what is being fought over. And I believe that the battle comes down to three foundational questions, three things that were answered one way at the founding of our nation, and they're being answered completely different today. And the distance that exists between the two answers, or between this set of answers, I should say, is great. And so the first question is, where do rights come from? Now, the founders answered this, and they answered it with very plain language, and there's no way to improve upon their answer. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Notice, by their Creator, not by government, not by the majority, not by culture, by God. That's a foundational claim. It means that rights are not granted by any earthly power, which means they cannot be revoked by any earthly power. Do you understand that? The government's job is not to decide what rights you have. Its job is to protect the rights you already have because God gave them to you. The answer being given today by, unfortunately, a growing number of academics and judges and cultural voices and on and on and on is completely different. They say rights are not given to us by God. They're whatever the community agrees to give. It's whatever we decide our members should have. They're granted by the state. And what the state grants, the state can take back. Now, I want you to understand how serious that difference is. If your right to life comes from God, no government can touch it without violating natural order. If your right to life comes from the government, then the government can redefine it whenever it decides the greater good demands it. And we see this, and there's multiple examples in the 20th century alone, Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and those were carried out by a government that decided rights were theirs. The rights, those governments believed that the rights belonged to the government, and it was their right to give and their right to take away. And the reality is that you cannot separate the rights from the foundation. Take away the foundation and the rights can't stand up. And we had these warnings from our founding fathers. The second question is, what is a human being? Well, our founders answered that as well, and their answer came straight from Scripture. Every person is made in the image of God, Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. If every human being is made in the image of God, then every human being has dignity. Not dignity they've earned. Not dignity that the government gives them. Dignity that is built into who they are. And it can't be stripped away by circumstances or power or by a majority vote. And that is the argument that Frederick Douglass made against slavery. It's the argument that Martin Luther King Jr. made from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. That is the argument that every serious human rights movement in American history has depended on. And that's true whether people knew it or not. If you take away the foundation, human dignity becomes negotiable. And a dignity that is negotiable, ladies and gentlemen, hear me clearly, is no dignity at all. And then the third question, what holds a free society together? This one, the founders thought about harder than almost anything else, because they understood that something that we have is different than what other societies have. And today, as we look around, what they found, we have forgotten. The reality is that freedom is hard to keep. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it is much easier to govern people by force than to govern a free people who have to choose to do the right thing. Self-government requires a level of shared moral commitment that does not, like it or not, it does not come naturally. And the founders knew exactly where the moral commitment had to come from. George Washington said it plainly, probably more plainly than it's ever been said, in his farewell address in 1796, which was the last major public statement of his life. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, he said, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. Notice his words. Indispensable. Not helpful. Not nice to have. Indispensable. And John Adams made it even more specific when he said that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and it's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Wholly inadequate. Second President of the United States, those are his words. The man who helped write the documents that founded this republic. He's telling us the Constitution was not designed to hold immoral people in check by force. He said rather it was designed to be the framework within which people who already had moral character could govern themselves. Take away the moral character and the framework collapses. If you look at America today, we've spent at least 60 years trying to remove the source of moral character from American public life. And then we act surprised when the framework begins to strain. Now, here's what makes this particular battle so hard to fight. Most of us would say that it happens many times where people are not watching. And I would technically agree with that. Let me give you an example, for instance. And you may want to really think about this. In 1962, the Supreme Court ruled in Engel versus Vitale that school-sponsored prayer was unconstitutional. And then the following year, it was Abington versus Schimpf. It ruled that Bible reading in public schools was unconstitutional. And so you think about that. That means that from 1776 to 1962, that is 186 years of our republic, American children had prayed in school. They had read the Bible in school. It was completely normal. It was unremarkable. But it was taken for granted. 186 years. And then 2 Supreme Court decisions handed down in back-to-back years. That entire 186 years of history was declared unconstitutional. Now listen, I believe in religious liberty. The First Amendment matters. And I'm not arguing for the government to tell children what to pray or to establish any particular denomination. That is not my point. The point is, the message those decisions sent to an entire generation of American children was not just that the government would stay neutral in religion. That was not the message. The message was, God does not belong here. Your faith, it had to be a private moment. Keep it at home. Keep it in your church. Do not bring it into the public life. And the American story. The story being told to your children in the institution that's most responsible for forming who they have become is the story where God no longer plays a role. That message was false. But it was delivered with the full authority of the highest court in the land, delivered to children day after day, year after year, in the most important institution in American life. And across 3 generations, it's worked. That is how a culture war is fought. Not with a shot heard round the world, but with a quiet, institutional decision that most people never read, handed down in a legal opinion that reshapes the formation of an entire generation without most of them ever knowing what happened. It's a war no one declared, and that's why so many people don't even realize that it's being fought. And I would say it's time to wake up. There's a passage in the book of Romans that I've thought about more than almost anything else in 23 years as I've watched this unfold. And Paul is writing to the church in Rome, the church living in the capital of the most powerful empire in the world, surrounded by a culture that was indifferent and even in some cases hostile to everything that it was supposed to believe. And he said this is Romans 13, 11, and 12, chapter 13, verses 11 and 12. And do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore let us cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. Knowing the time. That is the starting point for everything. Before you can act right, you have to understand clearly what moment we are living in. You have to see the situation for exactly what it is. Without these comfortable filters, without wishful thinking, without the reassuring assumption that somebody else is going to handle it. The reality is that most Americans do not know the time. They know something feels off. They know something is wrong. They sense that culture is moving in a direction that troubles them. They know in their gut that something important has been lost, but they don't know exactly what it is. The sleeper has to wake up. And that's what this series is about. Not the comfortable version of American Christianity. That's everything will work out fine and good guys always win in the end. The honest, historically grounded, sobering, and ultimately hopeful recognition that we are in a real battle. That the battle has been going badly for a long time, and that God, who raised up this nation, is looking for people who will open their eyes and join the fight. Now, let me be clear about something. I'm not trying to make you angry, because anger is easy. Anger feels like action without actually being any action whatsoever. What I am after is something much harder to come by, and that's clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from understanding history accurately. When we read Scripture honestly, and we can stand in this moment and look at it without blinking. That's clarity. And it's sobering without being disparaging. Clarity takes the battle seriously without losing sight of who wins in the end. Because here is what I know about this fight. God is not worried. God is not caught off guard. He is not pacing through heaven wondering how this is all going to turn out. He has a promise on the table found in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. That's a promise that has not expired. It's not ancient history. And it's available to any person right now willing to step up and meet those conditions. If my people, not the government, not the courts, not the universities, not the media, my people, that means us. And the responsibility, honestly, is ours. But the power, well, that belongs to him. And the first step is knowing the time. And that's where we are starting. Episode 1, the shot not heard. The war that nobody declared. 3 questions that determine everything, and the promise that is still on the table for a people willing to receive it. And so here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to think about one person in your life who has no idea this battle is happening. One person. One person who can feel that something is wrong with the country, but just hasn't been able to put a name to it. One person who needs to hear what we talked about today. I encourage you, send them this episode, just this one. Tell them to listen. And that's how the movement grows. Not through advertising budgets and marketing campaigns. Through one person telling another person, hey, you need to hear this. And if today's conversation has sparked something in you, if you want to go a little deeper, get the full argument, have the complete picture in your hands, I want you to go to legacylivingmedia.com. The book is there. The Battle is on America's New Civil War. Everything Legacy Living produces is there. Our other programs, our other resources, all in one place. legacylivingmedia.com. So I've been working on The Battle is On for a long time. It's actually the first book I ever started writing years and years ago. And I thought it would always be the first book that I put out. It turns out that's not the case as we head into the deep, which I think helped me navigate some of the stuff, the story of my journey. And then The Battle is On. And I do encourage you to go there. We've got some other really good resources on legacylivingmedia.com that I think will be beneficial to you. And listen, if you're listening on AM or FM radio, you need to subscribe to our podcast. We're going to start dropping briefings throughout the week. We got other content that's out there that's not going to air on FM radio. You have to subscribe on a podcast platform, or simply just go to legacylivingmedia.com. It will update automatically when I put new content out, or I should say when we put new content out. You really need to do that. Okay, next week we're going to go into episode 2, which discusses the 2 visions of America. And it's irreconcilable. The difference at the heart of everything that is happening in this country right now. I believe, and hopefully you'll listen in, it'll be one of the most clarifying conversations that we have ever had on this program, and I don't think you want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe and share this episode with someone. legacylivingmedia.com is where you need to be for all of our resources. As we close, I want to remind you, as always, to fight the good fight of faith, to contend for the faith. There is cause. It does matter. And it is important now. I'm Tom Sears, and this is What's Important Now, and it is important, ladies and gentlemen. It's more important now than ever. Visit us at legacylivingmedia.com, where you can grab hold of my newest book, The Battle is On, talking about the culture war in America. Have a great day. We'll talk soon. Take care.